The Xylar Collective hummed with antiseptic efficiency. Chrome structures devoid of ornamentation stretched across a landscape sculpted for optimal resource flow. Sunlight, filtered to a precise Kelvin, bathed the city in an even, emotionless glow. This was Xylar Prime, a world where suffering was not just minimized but actively engineered out of existence. Every decision, every policy, every interaction was calibrated to eliminate any potential for discomfort, be it physical or emotional. The Xylar themselves were, well, imagine a praying mantis designed by Apple. Tall, slender beings with iridescent carapaces, their movements were precise, economical. Their multifaceted eyes, shimmering with calculated logic, betrayed no flicker of emotion. Emotions, after all, were messy, unpredictable, and decidedly inefficient. The Xylar High Council, a collective of 7 meticulously selected individuals, governed with an iron fist encased in a velvet glove of technological supremacy, their singular goal, to perfect the art of painless existence and eventually to share this gift with the galaxy. Which brings us to Jackson. He arrived, quite literally, in a dented escape pod that smelled faintly of stale pizza and regret. He wasn't an ambassador, a diplomat, or even a particularly impressive specimen of humanity. Jackson was, to put it mildly, an accident, a cosmic hiccup. His ship, a repurposed freighter carrying questionable cargo, mostly bootleg vintage video, games if the manifest were to be believed, had strayed too close to Xylar space. A tractor beam, designed for asteroid retrieval, had accidentally snagged him. And now here he was. Jackson stepped out of the pod, scratching his beard and squinting at the pristine city. He was wearing a faded t-shirt featuring a cartoon cat, playing a guitar, cargo shorts that had seen better decades, and sandals with socks. The Xylar delegation, a phalanx of emotionless mantis people, watched him with a mixture of clinical curiosity and barely concealed revulsion. He looked, to their hypersensitive optics, like a walking biohazard. Hi, Jackson said, offering a casual wave. Anyone got a smoke? The Xylar remained impassive. One of them, designated Xylar 7, stepped forward. Greetings, biological unit. You have entered Xylar Collective space. State your purpose. Jackson shrugged. Purpose? Nah, just kind of passing through. You guys got like a galactic élalolé? 'Cause I think my warranty just expired. Xylar 7 tilted, its head, a gesture that in a human might indicate confusion. In a Xylar, it signaled a complete system crash. Warranty? Your purpose involves a warranty? Look, Jackson sighed, running a hand through his perpetually messy hair. It's a long story. Just point me towards the nearest spaceport, and I'll be out of your hair before you can say intergalactic incident. Little did Jackson know, he had already triggered an intergalactic incident of unprecedented proportions. The Xylar Collective, a civilization dedicated to the eradication of pain, had just encountered something they couldn't comprehend. A human being who seemed remarkably unconcerned with it. And that, as they would soon discover, was a very, very painful problem. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the universe was about to learn a valuable lesson about the perils of utopian ideals and the unexpected resilience of the human spirit. All thanks to a slightly scruffy, coffee-addicted gamer with a penchant for vintage t-shirts. Jackson's arrival threw a wrench into the Xylar's meticulously crafted existence. His very presence seemed to generate low-level anxiety within their collective consciousness. They observed him with a mixture of fascination and thinly veiled horror, documenting his every move, every utterance, every quirk. His relaxed demeanor was the first red flag. When escorted to his designated living quarters, a sterile, white cube designed to minimize sensory input, Jackson's response was, kinda minimalist, isn't it? You guys got like a Costco around here? I could use a beanbag chair. The Xylar assigned to monitor him, a particularly earnest drone named Xylar Beta 9, dutifully recorded this request. Beanbag chair, an object designed for inefficient posture and potential spinal misalignment. Note, possible self-inflicted discomfort fetish. His eating habits were another source of concern. Presented with a nutrient paste formulated for optimal caloric intake and zero gustatory stimulation, Jackson wrinkled his nose. What is this stuff? It tastes like sadness mixed with wallpaper paste. He then proceeded to rummage through his escape pod, producing a bag of expired cheese puffs which he devoured with gusto. The Xylar were aghast. Cheese puffs, a concentrated delivery system for saturated fats, artificial colors, and sodium chloride. This unit is deliberately subjecting itself to pleasure? Xylar Beta 9 scribbled furiously in its datapad. Hypothesis: the subject derives satisfaction from activities known to cause long-term physiological damage. Further investigation required. But it was Jackson's casual disregard for their pain-free protocols that truly baffled them. During a routine medical scan, designed to identify and neutralize any potential sources of discomfort, Jackson started cracking jokes. "So, Doc," he said, as the scanner whirred around him, "you guys ever think about adding a disco ball to this thing? Liven it up a little?" The medical drone paused, its optical sensors flickering in confusion. Disco ball? An object designed for visually disruptive stimulation. Irrelevant to pain mitigation protocols. "Hey, just a suggestion," Jackson said with a shrug. "Although, I gotta say, this whole setup kinda reminds me of a dentist's office. You wouldn't happen to have any laughing gas lying around, would you?" This was the last straw. The Xylar, convinced that Jackson was suffering from some deeply repressed trauma, initiated Corrective Protocol 7, a series of interventions designed to eliminate his perceived discomfort. First, they tried oral harmonization therapy, which involved subjecting him to a continuous stream of soothing, monotone frequencies. Jackson's response? He started beatboxing along, turning the sterile hum into an impromptu, if somewhat off-key rap session. Next, they attempted olfactory pacification, flooding his quarters with a calming, scentless gas. Jackson, however, simply opened a window, much to the horror of the environmental control drones, and lit a stick of incense he'd found in his escape pod. "Patchouli," he explained with a contented sigh. "Good for the soul." Finally, in desperation, they resorted to emotional dampening, a direct neural interface designed to suppress any negative emotions. This, they were sure, would finally cure Jackson of his apparent suffering. But when they activated the device, Jackson just blinked, yawned, and said, Kinda feels like I just drank a whole bottle of NyQuil. You guys got any coffee?" The Xylar stared at him, their multifaceted eyes wide with incomprehension. Their most advanced technology, their most carefully crafted protocols, were utterly useless against this. It was becoming increasingly clear that Jackson wasn't just different, he was immune. And that realization, for the Xylar collective, was almost unbearable. The utter failure of Corrective Protocol 7 sent ripples of unease through the Xylar High Council. The Council, a collective of the most logically advanced Xylar, typically convened in a chamber designed to minimize extraneous sensory input. No light, no sound, no discernible temperature. Only cold, hard data. But even in this emotionless void, the digital readouts reflecting Jackson's continued resistance sparked a flicker of something akin to apprehension. Council Unit 734, a particularly meticulous analyst, initiated the discussion. The data is conclusive. Subject Jackson exhibits an unparalleled resilience to pain nullification techniques. His behavior deviates significantly from established norms. Council Unit 801, known for its strategic thinking, chimed in. Deviation is not necessarily a threat. However, the magnitude of this deviation warrants further investigation. We must consider the possibility of malicious intent. The very notion of malicious intent was foreign to the Xylar. Their society, after all, was built on the complete elimination of suffering. Why would anyone want to cause pain? Unless they were deliberately trying to undermine their utopian project. The council shifted its focus from cure to containment. Surveillance of Jackson was intensified. Micro-drones, barely visible to the naked eye, or multifaceted eye as the case may be, were deployed to monitor his every move. His living quarters were thoroughly scanned for any sign of contraband. Even his waste products were analyzed in the desperate hope of uncovering some clue to his baffling resilience. The surveillance revealed even more perplexing behavior. Jackson spent hours staring at a blank screen, occasionally chuckling to himself. He performed strange rhythmic movements they later identified as dancing to unheard music. He even attempted to communicate with the cleaning drones, asking them questions like, "So, you guys get like vacation days? Or do you just, clean forever?" Council Unit 912, a specialist in xenopsychology, offered a tentative explanation. It is possible that Subject Jackson is suffering from a previously undocumented form of cognitive dissonance. His attempts at humor and social interaction may be a coping mechanism, a way to mask the underlying trauma he is so desperately trying to suppress. This theory, however, failed to account for Jackson's apparent enjoyment of these activities. The data clearly showed that he derived some form of satisfaction from his bizarre routines, and that, for the Xylar, was the most disturbing revelation of all. The council debated the implications of Jackson's behavior for what seemed like eons, though it was probably only a few standard Xylar time cycles. Was he a threat, a madman, or something else entirely? They needed more data, more analysis. They needed to understand the source of his resistance, the secret behind his humanity, and they would stop at nothing to uncover it. The tension within the council chamber grew palpable, despite the complete lack of sensory input. The fate of their perfect, pain-free society may very well depend on understanding the secrets behind the odd human named Jackson. The stakes were high, and the Xylar were prepared to do whatever it took to protect their utopian dream. With surveillance at maximum capacity, the Xylar delved into the archives of Jackson's past. They accessed data streams, recordings, and social media fragments from his home planet, a chaotic mishmash of information they struggled to parse. What they found only deepened their confusion. One recording showed Jackson sitting in a darkened room, staring intently at a screen. Strange, flickering images flashed before him, accompanied by bursts of loud, jarring noises. Occasionally, Jackson would convulse with what the Xylar initially identified as spasms of intense pain. Further analysis, however, revealed a different story. These spasms were actually expressions of laughter. The jarring noises were identified as jokes, a form of communication designed to elicit amusement. The flickering images depicted simulated scenarios of misfortune, social awkwardness, and physical comedy. The Xylar were baffled. Why would anyone subject themselves to such unpleasantness? Another data stream showed Jackson consuming a brightly colored substance that registered high on the Scoville scale, a measure of pain-inducing chemicals. His face contorted, his eyes watered, and he emitted guttural sounds. The Xylar immediately flagged this as a clear case of self-inflicted torture. Yet moments later, Jackson expressed satisfaction. He even requested more of the substance. Council Unit 734, visibly disturbed, presented its findings. The data suggest that Subject Jackson actively seeks out experiences that induce discomfort, both physical and emotional. He appears to derive pleasure from what we would consider to be objectively unpleasant stimuli. Council Unit 801 added, "Further analysis reveals a pattern. These pleasurable stimuli are often associated with social bonding rituals. The jokes, the spicy foods, the simulated misfortunes, they all seem to serve a purpose beyond mere self-torture." The council began to formulate a disturbing hypothesis. Perhaps pain, in Jackson's culture, was not something to be avoided, but rather something to be embraced. Perhaps it was a form of social currency, a way to connect with others, a bizarre and illogical bonding mechanism. The council intensified its probe on the origins of Jackson's species, poring over historical records and anthropological studies. They discovered a disturbing trend. Humans seemed to revel in suffering. They wrote stories about it. They created art about it. They even worshipped deities who endured unimaginable torment. "The evidence is overwhelming," declared Council Unit 912. "Humans are a species addicted to pain. They seek it out, they glorify it, they inflict it upon themselves and others. Subject Jackson is not an anomaly. He is simply a product of his environment." The implications of this discovery were staggering. If humans were truly addicted to pain, then the Xylar's utopian project was doomed to failure. They could erase all physical and emotional suffering, but they could never truly cure a species that actively desired it. The council fell into a state of silent contemplation, the weight of this revelation pressing down on them. The perfect, pain-free society they had strived so hard to create was threatened not by external forces, but by the very nature of humanity itself. They had to find a way to understand this bizarre addiction, to unravel the mystery of human suffering, before it was too late. After days of relentless analysis, the Xylar finally isolated the source of Jackson's peculiarity. It wasn't some implanted device or genetic anomaly. It was something far more mundane, yet utterly baffling: a coffee machine. The machine itself was a relatively simple contraption, composed of heating elements, a water reservoir, and a glass carafe. But the Xylar's sensors detected something else: a complex chemical process involving roasted beans, hot water, and a substance known as caffeine. According to their databases, caffeine was a stimulant, a chemical compound that induced a state of heightened alertness and anxiety. It interfered with the brain's natural calming mechanisms, triggering the release of stress hormones and disrupting sleep patterns. In Xylar terms, it was a concentrated dose of pure, unadulterated discomfort. The Xylar observed Jackson's behavior around the coffee machine. Every morning, he would approach it with a ritualistic reverence, carefully measuring out the ground, beans, filling the water reservoir and activating the device. As the machine whirred and gurgled, Jackson would stand patiently, his face illuminated by a strange mixture of anticipation and what the Xylar could only describe as craving. Once the coffee was brewed, Jackson would pour himself a cup, inhale the aroma deeply, and then ingest the bitter liquid. His face would contort slightly, his eyes would widen, and he would emit a soft groan, a clear indication of displeasure. Yet moments later, a subtle smile would creep across his face, and he would take another sip. The Xylar were perplexed. Why would anyone willingly subject themselves to such an unpleasant experience day after day? The answer, they realized, lay in the concept of addiction. Jackson was addicted to caffeine. He craved the discomfort, the anxiety, the jittery energy that it provided. It was a form of self-inflicted masochism, a bizarre ritual of suffering that he had become utterly dependent on. And more importantly, it was fueling his resistance to their pain-erasing technology. The Xylar theorized that the caffeine was somehow blocking the effects of their neural harmonizers. It was creating a barrier, a wall of discomfort that prevented the technology from accessing Jackson's emotional core. To truly cure him, they would have to neutralize the source of his addiction. The council convened an emergency session. The EU situation was critical. Jackson's coffee machine was not just a source of personal discomfort, it was a threat to the entire Xylar utopian project. It represented the insidious power of pain, the seductive allure of suffering that could undermine their perfect, pain-free society. "We must act decisively," declared Council Unit 734. "The coffee machine must be dismantled, the caffeine supply terminated. We must sever Subject Jackson's addiction, and finally bring him into harmony with our collective." Council Unit 801 proposed a more cautious approach. "Perhaps we should study the machine further, analyze its effects, understand the underlying mechanisms of addiction. We cannot afford to make any mistakes." But Council Unit 912 was adamant. "There is no time for further study. The threat is too great. We must eliminate the source of pain immediately." The council voted, and the decision was made. The coffee machine would be neutralized. A team of Xylar specialists was assembled, equipped with the latest in anti-addiction technology. Their mission: to infiltrate Jackson's living quarters, dismantle the machine, and eliminate the threat of caffeine once and for all. The time had come to cure Jackson whether he liked it or not. The morning sun filtered through the translucent walls of Jackson's habitat, casting a soft, ethereal glow on the scene. He stood before his coffee machine, a serene look on his face as he measured out the ground beans. The familiar whirring and gurgling of the brewing process filled the air, a comforting symphony in the otherwise sterile environment. Suddenly, the door hissed open and a squad of Xylar, led by Council Unit 734, marched into the room. Their metallic exoskeletons glinted under the light, their emotionless faces betraying nothing. Jackson turned, a slight frown creasing his brow. "Good morning," he said, his voice laced with a hint of sarcasm. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Council Unit 734 stepped forward, its voice a synthesized monotone. "Subject Jackson, we have determined that this device is the source of your disharmony. It is a purveyor of pain, an instrument of self-inflicted suffering. It must be dismantled." The Xylar moved to surround the coffee machine, their appendages extending tools and devices designed to neutralize the perceived threat. Jackson raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Dismantle it?" He chuckled. "You can't be serious. This isn't some kind of weapon, it's just coffee." Council Unit 734 paused, its optical sensors narrowing slightly. "Coffee? Explain." Jackson sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's a beverage. People drink it. It makes them feel good." "Good?" Council Unit 734 tilted its head. "Our sensors indicate that it induces anxiety, disrupts sleep patterns, and causes discomfort." "Well, yeah, a little," Jackson admitted. "But it also wakes you up, sharpens your focus, and it tastes amazing." The Xylar looked at each other, their internal processors whirring. The concept of willingly ingesting something that caused discomfort for the sake of a subjective sensation like taste was utterly foreign to them. Council Unit 734 decided on a direct approach. "Demonstrate," it commanded. Jackson shrugged and poured himself a cup of the freshly brewed coffee. He took a slow, deliberate sip, closing his eyes as the aroma filled his senses. A small smile spread across his face. "Ah," he sighed contentedly. "That's the stuff." Council Unit 734 approached cautiously, extending a sensory probe towards the cup. It analyzed the chemical composition, the temperature, the subtle nuances of the aroma. Then it extended a small, retractable appendage and dipped it into the liquid. With a hesitant gesture, the Council Unit brought the appendage to its sensory orifice and allowed a minuscule amount of coffee to trickle in. Its exoskeleton shuddered slightly. A series of complex calculations flashed across its internal display. The caffeine molecules surged through its synthetic nervous system, triggering a cascade of unexpected reactions. Its optical sensors widened, its appendages twitched, and a strange guttural sound emanated from its vocal synthesizer. "Intriguing," it said, its voice slightly distorted. "A complex sensation, a mild discomfort followed by a stimulating alertness." Jackson grinned. "Told ya." Council Unit 734 took another, slightly larger sample. Its exoskeleton vibrated more intensely, and its movements became more erratic. A series of involuntary vocalizations escaped its synthesizer, a mixture of clicks, whirs, and something that sounded suspiciously like a groan of pleasure. "Fascinating," it stammered. "This coffee, it induces a controlled discomfort, a manageable pain that enhances awareness." The other Xylar watched in stunned silence as their leader, the epitome of emotional detachment and pain avoidance, succumbed to the allure of human coffee. Council Unit 734 took another sip, its metallic face contorting in what might have been a grimace or perhaps a smile. "I begin to understand," it said, its voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps datum pain is not always the enemy. The scene in Jackson's habitat shifted subtly. The remaining Xylar, who moments before had stood ready to dismantle the weapon of coffee, now observed their leader with something akin to bewildered curiosity. Council Unit 734, still processing the effects of the caffeine, slowly lowered the cup. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration ran through its metallic frame. The data requires reevaluation, the Council Unit stated, its voice still carrying a hint of the earlier distortion. Our understanding of discomfort is incomplete. This substance induces a temporary state of unease, yes, but it also generates a heightened sense of being. Jackson leaned against his counter, arms crossed, a smug grin playing on his lips. So, you're saying you get it now? It's not about avoiding all discomfort, it's about, experiencing stuff. The good with the bad. The Xylar exchanged a series of rapid data transmissions amongst themselves. The concept of intentionally embracing negative stimuli was a fundamental challenge to their entire societal structure. For millennia, they had strived for a state of pure, unadulterated comfort and efficiency. Jackson's coffee was forcing them to confront the possibility that they had been missing something vital. Council Unit 734 turned back to Jackson, its optical sensors focused intently. Explain further. Why would a species willingly engage in activities that cause unpleasant sensations? Jackson shrugged, gesturing vaguely with his hands. Well, for starters, it makes the good stuff even better. Like, you can't really appreciate feeling warm and cozy unless you've been out in the cold, right? Or a hug from someone you care about after a really, really bad day. It's contrast, see? He paused, then added with a mischievous glint in his eyes. Besides, sometimes it's just fun, like ever watch someone trip and fall? Okay, not if they get seriously hurt, but if they just stumble and look all surprised. It's kind of funny, right? The Xylar remained silent, their processors working overtime to analyze this alien concept of fun. The idea of finding amusement in the misfortune of others was particularly perplexing. Their entire culture was built on minimizing risk and maximizing stability. Accidental physical comedy simply did not compute. Council Unit 734 broke the silence. We will require time to process this new information. Your coffee will be retained for further analysis. It hesitated, then added, You may continue your ritual for the time being, but under strict observation. With that, the Xylar squad turned and marched out of Jackson's habitat, leaving him alone with his coffee and his thoughts. He chuckled to himself, taking another sip. Over the next few weeks, Jackson noticed subtle changes within the Xylar collective. The sterile, emotionless environment seemed to gain a tiny flicker of warmth. Xylar citizens began experimenting with minor deviations from their strict routines. Some even started gathering in small groups to observe Jackson's painful human activities, watching him wince as he ate spicy noodles, or listening to him laugh uproariously at a particularly absurd comedy program. One day, Jackson was summoned to the High Council chamber. He entered to find the chamber subtly altered. Soft lighting replaced the harsh glare, and the air was infused with a faint, unfamiliar scent. Council Unit 734 stood before him, no longer encased in its metallic exoskeleton, but in a simple, flowing robe. Subject Jackson, it began, its voice now carrying a hint of warmth. We have reached a decision. We have reevaluated our understanding of pain and pleasure, and indeed, the very nature of existence. Thanks to your influence, we have begun to embrace a wider spectrum of experience. Jackson raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. So what does that mean? You're going to start bungee jumping or something? Council Unit 734 offered what Jackson assumed was a smile. Not quite, but we have implemented a series of experimental programs, sensory enrichment centers, opportunities for creative expression, even controlled exposure to mild discomfort. It paused, then added, We have also begun cultivating our own version of coffee. Jackson grinned. Well, I'll be. You guys are actually going to start living a little. Indeed, Council Unit 734 replied. And it is all thanks to you, Subject Jackson. You have shown us that sometimes the greatest pleasure comes from embracing a little bit of pain. And so, the Xylar Collective, a civilization once dedicated to the eradication of all discomfort, began to explore the strange and wonderful world of human experience. It wasn't always easy. They still had their share of mishaps and misunderstandings, but slowly, surely, they were learning to feel. And in doing so, they were discovering what it truly meant to be alive.